I just wanted to mention before we start into things, this program is brought to you by PEAK's Young Adult Advisory Group, a group of volunteers working to connect young adults with PEAK and connect young adults with nature. If you or anyone you know is interested in joining our YAD group, please contact me in the chat and I will get you connected. Okay. The Los Alamos Nature Center is currently open to the public 5 days a week, offering many ways you can interact and connect with nature. Check the PEAK website, PEEC Nature, peaknature.org, for more information about our upcoming programs. We are, of course, only able to offer programming like this tonight, and the ones we do a lot of the time, thanks to the wonderful members and donors. So thank you if you are a member and donor joining us tonight. Thank you so much for everything you do. And if you are interested in becoming a member or donor, please visit our website, peecnature.org, to learn more. Without further ado, I think that's about it. So let's get into introducing our presenter. Marissa Ardovino is a Jemez Mountain Salamander intern working at Bandelier National Monument. She is a 2021 graduate for Virginia Tech's College of Natural Resources Wildlife Conservation Program, where she spent time studying the habitat requirements of bats and salamanders in southern Appalachia. Her interests include herpetology, STEM accessibility, and conserving wildlife for the enjoyment of future generations. Those are wonderful interests. I love those. So Marissa, I'm going to hand it over to you and you can take it away.
Thank you, Krista. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. How does that look?
You look great. Good job.
Perfect. Alrighty. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining me tonight. For those who don't know, my name is Marissa, and I'm talking tonight about the threatened and endangered species research that I've been assisting with here at Bandelier National Monument. I'm going to fix this real quick. Okay, hopefully it's not lagging too much. As Krista said, I am originally from Virginia. I went to Virginia Tech and I was raised in Northern Virginia, about a half hour outside of DC. In my undergraduate career at Virginia Tech, I did undergraduate research on forage resource partitioning of Appalachian bat species, mostly just looking at how different bats use different times of the night and different times throughout an entire summer season to limit the competition between different species for insects in different habitat types. I also did an undergraduate research project on the recruitment and retention methods for women in STEM in Europe and compared those methods to those used in the United States. I love talking about that, so if anybody has questions about that at the end, I would be happy to answer those. After I leave Bandelier this week, Friday is my last day of work, unfortunately, but after I leave, I'm going to be moving to Charleston, South Carolina to assist a group of Clemson graduate students on wood duck nest recruitment research, mostly just looking at duck egg development over the spring season and then allowing those eggs to hatch and monitoring the development of the ducklings over time. Looking at some of the stuff I've done here at Bandelier, this internship has been really unique because my position title is a Mez Mountain Salamander intern, so that was the main gist of the project of my work throughout the season, but I had a really unique opportunity to help with a lot of other natural resource projects at Bandelier. These pictures are just a few of the highlights from the season. On the far left, is a picture of one of our backpacking sites where we camped overnight to assist with macroinvertebrate surveys in Capulin Canyon at Bandelier. The top two pictures, the one in the middle and then on the right, are part of the beaver reintroduction project that I've been able to assist with. Catherine did a fabulous presentation on beaver reintroduction last night, which was recorded, so I highly recommend watching her presentation for more details on that. We also were able to assist with migratory bird banding, which Catherine also covered in her presentation last night. Mostly just capturing birds and putting little leg bands on their wrist to give them a unique identification number and allow us to track their movements if they are found in another banding location or if they return to Bandelier in upcoming years. Really just kind of allows us to get an idea of bird populations at the park and also reproductive success, overall health of our bird populations, a lot of really, really cool data like that. And then this bottom right picture is a mountain lion collaring project that's been ongoing at Bandelier. I was lucky enough to actually get to go out with Sarah Milligan and Mark Payton from the Valley Caldera to go replace a collar on this female mountain lion. And that was a absolutely life-changing experience for me. I'd never done any type of large mammal work before. So that was very, very cool. Today's talk is going to be focused on three main threatened and endangered species research projects that I've helped out with at Bandelier. And then I'm also going to give some of my personal advice about pursuing a natural resources career. And we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions, but I'm also more than happy to answer questions as I go. To start off, I think it's important to kind of get some vocabulary out of the way. The Endangered Species Act is a whole group of policies that the United States uses to determine conservation needs for different plants and animals across the entire nation. Threatened is the lesser of the two statuses that are used to categorize organisms. A threatened species is endangered, is likely to become endangered in the future, but populations are stable enough that they could escape that risk if conservation actions are taken. Endangered refers to a species that is at risk of extinction across its entire range. I guess technically it could also be a portion of its range, but there is a lot of research being put into how the genetic integrity of organisms is preserved in endangered species research. That's a whole nother branch of research that I don't need to get into right now. But I'm going to be mostly focusing on federal listings. I do think it's also important to note that there are different state listings for organisms as well. And a state listing doesn't have as much pull as a federal listing does. So there's just a lot of terminology describing this area of wildlife conservation. Starting off with the Jemez Mountain Salamander, this is where I did the bulk of my work throughout the season. The Jemez Mountain Salamander is a terrestrial species found only in the Jemez Mountains. They are a lungless salamander species, and they breathe primarily through cutaneous respiration, which is a series of gas exchanges that occur directly through skin or the layers of organs right beneath the skin. They are a nocturnal species. They're very, very rarely active during the day because this region's just too dry to support their life history needs during the day. They're also fossorial, which means that they are almost exclusively found underground. They do come to the surface to feed on macroinvertebrates and also to reproduce, but you'll never see them out walking along the forest floor. They're always at least under a rock or log on the ground surface. But most of the time, they are at least a few inches below the ground surface, maneuvering either through decayed root channels of trees or through fractured rock pieces that kind of create little tunnels that they can navigate through. Even though they are fossorial, they cannot burrow on their own. They don't have the forearm strength to actually create channels. So they are dependent on existing cavities, fractures, root canals for them to move through. Some of the threats to Jemez Mountain Salamander survival include logging and anthropogenic activity, which is pretty vague, but one of the big ones in this region is cattle activity on public lands. You get a large herd of cattle rummaging through an area and they just flip every rock or log within sight, and they can cause a huge amount of damage to an area that would have otherwise been suitable salamander habitat. High intensity wildfires and just climate change in general are also detrimental to this species. They require really, really moist conditions in order to survive. That cutaneous respiration that I was talking about really can only take place if they're in an area with really, really high moisture and humidity levels. And the high intensity wildfires that moved through northern New Mexico in the past 10, 20 years will either kill the salamanders on site, or they will burn the top layer of the ground enough to kill off all of the macroinvertebrates in a region. And then if the salamander was low enough in the ground to survive the initial fire, they're often not able to find enough food or resources when they reemerge in the following season. Climate change is also an issue, mostly because the warming of the lower elevation areas is pushing the salamanders up higher and higher onto mountain peaks. And eventually, as the climate warms, moving farther and farther up those mountains, they're just going to be pushed to their limits, and they'll likely not be able to survive in those hotter climates, hotter, drier areas that are being created by the warming of our planet. The Jemez Mountain Salamander was listed as federally endangered in 2013, and conservation efforts have been going on since long before that, but they're really, really ramping up now because populations are dwindling significantly, and we're kind of running out of time on this species. So here at Bandelier, we conducted all of our research during the monsoon season. Ranges a little bit every year. This year, we had a really, really good monsoon. There were very, very moist conditions, high humidity levels in these high elevation conifer forests. And it rained pretty consistently from early June all the way through early August. There are two different types of surveys that we conducted across Bandelier, the Valley Caldera, and Santa Fe National Forest. Demography surveys are looking at areas where there are known salamander populations existing on the landscape and surveying those areas over and over again to try to get an idea of the total population in those areas. Occupancy surveys were conducted in areas where it was likely that there was suitable salamander habitat, but it wasn't necessarily known if there were salamanders existing on the landscape in those regions. After we did our two types of surveys, we also assisted with a long-term activity monitoring project for these salamanders, where we used this massive metal detector looking thing that I have on the right side of the slide, where we were actually looking for small microchips that we injected under the skin of the salamanders. And we used these metal detectors to pick up the identification numbers on those microchips and track movement of the salamanders after we initially caught them. I also wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Nancy Carricker at the University of Rhode Island and Rachel Lohman at the US Geological Survey for being the leads on this project. I was just a field technician for them, and it was amazing being able to work with them all summer. So this is a little bit more, this is a more detailed look at what a salamander capture actually looked like during our surveys. On the far left, I have my co-intern Catherine flipping cover objects as we moved across either a demography plot or moved through an occupancy survey. It's really important with these surveys that when we're flipping cover objects, that we put them back exactly as we found them, because the microclimate underneath of those cover objects is so sensitive to drying out from even the smallest air gap that's left from not putting a rock or log back properly. And if we did that every single time we were going out and doing these surveys, we would be the ones destroying the salamander habitat. And that's definitely not the goal. So as we're moving through these plots, if we found a salamander, we'd yell salamander to alert the rest of our crew. We'd very gently pick it up and put it into a pre-moistened Ziploc bag. And then we took a number of measurements on every salamander, looking at overall length of the individual, the trunk length, which is measured from the front armpit to the back armpit. We took weight on all of our salamanders, and with the adults, we were also occasionally able to sex them by looking at their at the underside and examining their sex organs under a microscope, which is kind of what Dr. Carricker is doing here on the far right side. These microscopes were also used in order to pit tag the salamanders. And the pit tagging process only occurred for the adults that we captured. For the smaller ones that we were catching, under 20 millimeters in the total trunk length, we used a series of polymer dyes to uniquely identify each juvenile salamander, so that if we were to catch that one again, we could refer back to those unique color codes that we were using to know which salamander it is that we were recapturing. The pit tags are only about, they're definitely smaller than a grain of rice, but I think the easiest way to visualize it is like a small microchip that you put into a domestic cat or dog. And clearly that would be enormous if we were to be putting those onto these little juvenile salamanders here. They're only like 30 millimeters long. So why should we care about the Jemez Mountain Salamander? They are an endemic species to the Jemez Mountains, and that means if they are extirpated from this mountain range, there's no other population of them around to maintain the population. They have really specific habitat requirements. It's kind of those high elevation conifer forests that I was talking about earlier. And so they are just, it's a very delicate balance trying to preserve the salamanders while we also are doing activities like fire management and timber harvesting across this region. They are also only one of 3 species of salamander that can be found in New Mexico. In northern New Mexico, there are only one of 2 species. The only other one that we have here in the northern region is the tiger salamander. When you go to the southern part of the state, there's also the Sacramento Mountain Salamander. And so they, in my opinion and the opinion of others, they should just be protected for their intrinsic value. Salamanders also in general help reduce carbon output. You might think that's hard to believe for such a small animal, but when they are constantly eating the small macroinvertebrates that would otherwise be causing the decay of wood and other organic material on the forest floor, salamanders can actually eat enough in a solid population to reduce those carbon outputs significantly. So before I move on from the salamanders, does anybody have any questions that I should answer? Doesn't look like it. I can't see the chat right now.
No questions right now.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay. Our next area, our next project area that I helped out with was research on the Mexican spotted owl here at Bandelier. These owls are the 4th largest owl in the entire United States. They have about a 45-inch wingspan, which is pretty massive. And they are great at pest control. They eat mostly small rodents, and they'll also occasionally eat other birds and lizards. They have the largest geographic range of the 4 subspecies of spotted owls, and it's pretty cute because they form very long-term relationships with their partners, and they have a lifespan of about 15 to 17 years, and they'll often stay with the same mate throughout that entire period. They also have really, really complex communication between both their mates and their young, and I'll get into that a little bit later about how we actually look at those calls. But it's super fascinating how complex their communication is. And they create their nests in exposed rock faces. Occasionally in other parts of their range, they'll also use trees and other types of nest locations, but here in the northern part of New Mexico, we're mostly looking for them in deep canyon crevices or naturally carved out areas in the Bandelier Tuff. They also have a really, really low survival rate in the first year of their lives. In most cases, only about 11% of fledglings survive their first year. And that also kind of plays into the threats for their overall survival as a species. Habitat loss and fragmentation are huge, with both urbanization and timber harvesting being kind of detrimental for habitat continuity across the landscape. And the same goes for high intensity wildfires that are just taking out perches and killing off rodent populations that would otherwise be sustaining these owls. Also going back to the low survival rates for that first year of their lives, great horned owl predation is another huge issue for fledglings. And the Mexican spotted owl is a threatened species in the US and Mexico. which is pretty great because having that status in both countries allows for a lot more wide-ranging conservation efforts to take place. So looking at the Mexican spotted owl surveying that we did here at Bandelier, there are a couple different methods that we used. I have an audio recorder here. We use these to record the really complex calls that I was talking about earlier. They have 4 different types of calls that they will make. And there are programs that we have to actually parse out those calls from the background noise that these recorders will also be picking up. And then we will also have a person actually sit and listen through those calls to verify whether or not an owl is confirmed on a specific recorder. Those 4 types of calls are a 4-note call, which I have a picture of on the bottom of this screen. You can see there are 4 very distinct areas where the owl is actually making noise here. There's also a contact call that's mostly used by the females. There's a bark call that is used for long distance communication between individuals. And then there's also a juvenile begging call that's used by the fledglings when they want food. Playback surveys were another type of spotted owl survey method that we used. This is where we would go out to a location where we suspected that an owl was present. We would play the 4-note call off of a speaker and wait to hear if an owl responded back to us. With those 4-note calls, you can determine sex generally because the male calls are significantly lower than the female calls. So these playback surveys were also pretty important for establishing demographics of a specific population. Going along with those playback surveys, we would do nest searches where in this picture on the right, we were actually up in some tent rocks looking in these crevices in the rock because during our playback survey, we had a male that was calling to us, but he wouldn't actually show himself while we were doing the survey. So we assumed that he was sitting on a nest. We spent a pretty long time looking around in these rocks, trying to find him. We were never fully successful on that, but we're pretty sure that he's there and we were pretty sure that he was on a nest. So that bodes really well for next year's MSO surveys. And this data is really important for Bandelier because it kind of helps managers figure out what kind of management activities need to take place on the landscape. If there's a prescribed burn scheduled for an area and we go out and find evidence of a spotted owl nest, we definitely need to change the plans after that. But doing these surveys allows us to figure that out before they do something like a prescribed burn. The last of the 3 projects that I helped out with this season was the New Mexico meadow jumping mouse. This is a rodent species that's found in New Mexico, eastern Arizona, and southeastern Colorado. They almost exclusively live in riparian areas where there's a lot of vegetation that produces seeds that they can eat throughout the summer months. They are almost completely inactive for 2/3 of the year. And so it's really important that they are able to have steady access to seeds and sedges and other types of things like the native coneflower species, because they're really only eating and reproducing during that 3-month summer period. Some of the threats to meadow jumping mouse survival include habitat loss and fragmentation. At Bandelier, that's kind of specific to the floods that came through in 2013 that wiped out a lot of the riparian vegetation in our canyons, and also likely killed off the populations of mice that were here. In other parts of the region, cattle grazing is a big issue. This picture is from some Jemez Mountain Salamander surveys that we were doing up in Santa Fe National Forest. But you can kind of see behind this cow, there was a dip down off of this hill that we were standing on. And that area was identified by a Fish and Game member that specialized in New Mexico meadow jumping mouse habitat as an area that could be sustaining a population of mice. And knowing that these cattle were just running back and forth across this creek and trampling all the vegetation, there was manure all over the creek bed. It's unlikely that mice would want to live in this area. The New Mexico meadow jumping mouse was listed as federally endangered in 2014. It was state endangered prior to that, but as I was talking about earlier, the federal listing is typically much more valuable in conservation efforts. So the survey methods that we used at Bandelier include this very fancy plastic track pad. We would actually set these out along a creek bed. You can kind of see here, there's a door on each end where the mice could freely walk in and out of the box. We would put a large piece of contact paper all along the bottom of this track pad, and then we would put 2 piles of bait on either end. So the mice would theoretically run through the box, step on an ink pad in the middle of the contact paper, grab whatever food we had in the other end of the trap, and then run back out. Some of these track pads get very, very messy. Some of them end up with hundreds of footprints. Occasionally in past years, they've gotten chipmunks and even squirrels that try to get into the traps. They're not traps. I shouldn't use that word. They're just track pads. The animals that go in and out are never contained in the box. So after we remove the contact paper from the boxes, this is often what they would look like on the left side of the screen. Circled here is a potential meadow jumping mouse footprint from one of last year's surveys. This image on the right is the New Mexico meadow jumping mouse footprint that I have boxed in red as compared to a deer mouse and a vole track. You can see it can be difficult to confirm mouse presence in an area, and this was a potential track circled here on the left, but I believe it was determined that it wasn't actually a meadow jumping mouse. Okay, so switching gears now, those are the 3 threatened and endangered animal research projects that I've been helping out with at Bandelier. And now we're going to switch into some of the personal advice that I have about pursuing a career in natural resources. But I'm gonna stop real quick and see if there were any questions. If not, I'll just keep going.
We have quite a few questions, but maybe we'll just save them until the end at this point.
Perfect.
There's a lot.
Okay, so looking at careers in natural resources, this part of the talk is definitely geared towards high school and early college students. But if you don't fit into either of those categories, I suppose it could still be helpful information if you want a career change. Natural resources sciences in the United States were historically focused on utilitarian value of plants and animals and other resources. Up until the 1960s, most natural resources management was only looking at things that could be hunted, fished, or used in the timber industry. It wasn't really until the 1960s when we started getting publications like Silent Spring by Rachel Carson and other things that were bringing awareness to water and air pollution across the United States that we kind of shifted into modern day natural resources conservation. Kind of moving forward into the 21st century, I saw a report just today that said the outdoor recreation industry in the United States made up 1.8% of our 2020 GDP. And I think that really goes to show just how important natural resources sciences are, because you can't have an outdoor recreation field, or you can't have outdoor recreation without the natural resources that scientists are working so hard to conserve. A question that I like to start off with when we have these types of conversations is, what does a scientist look like? There's a massive stereotype existing in this community where scientists have to be an old white man. And I really think that our generation can be the one to kind of challenge that stigma. But it really starts with making the natural resources profession more accessible for all groups. So I think that's just a really important thing that we all kind of need to sit with and acknowledge before we can work on diversifying this field. So looking at natural resource careers, natural resources as a term is very, very broad, and it kind of covers a lot of different fields within that umbrella term. This is just a very, very short list of what some of those fields look like, but these industries are not mutually exclusive. It's incredibly important that there is collaboration between things like fish and wildlife management and GIS, because you can't really have wildlife management without visualizations of wildlife range maps that GIS experts are creating for natural resource conservation. I think it's also really important that we look at the lesser known areas of this field, like environmental law and policy. You don't really need to have a super strong science background for some of these fields. And while that does assist in some areas, like conservation biology and forestry, wildlife management, those things, there are areas for those who want to make contributions to natural resources without having that really hard science background. There are a number of different agencies and organizations and private firms that you can be employed by in this field. Again, this list is not comprehensive. Most of the work I've done has been with federal and state agencies. So those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. But I have so many classmates and friends who have been able to pursue careers in other industries. And again, it kind of just shows how diverse the field really can be. For this slide, I wanted to talk about skills that are beneficial in natural resource careers, but I didn't really want to focus on the hard science skills that you would get from an actual science-based education. I really just kind of wanted to show that because those science educations vary so much, the base skills that you need are really just being a good team player with strong communication skills and a general passion for what you're working on. And it is a competitive field, but as I've kind of said before, there really is a place for everybody. And you don't need to be the #1 biology student in your high school or college classes in order to be successful. I personally think that a passion for what you're working on and a willingness to show up and learn on the job will get you really, really far. This is just a quick overview for those who are really early on in that natural resource career decision-making stage. If you are currently in high school, I think one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, do I want to go to college? If the answer is no, there are options with organizations like the Youth Conservation Corps, which does a lot of projects here at Bandelier. Things like trail maintenance and also assisting with natural resource projects at parks across the country are two things that you have an option to do through the Youth Conservation Corps. There are also conservation jobs, technician positions that don't require a college degree. And so those are always great options for those who don't want to pursue a post-secondary education. If you are interested in going to college, I think it's really important to find an institution that has a strong natural resources program. And if you can find that, then maybe start looking for a program that's even more specific to your interests. When I decided to go to Virginia Tech, I realized that they had an entire college devoted to natural resources. And once I got my bearings in the college as a whole, I was able to settle on wildlife conservation as a major. Once you're in college, I think two really important questions to ask yourself are, what are the types of work that I enjoy doing, and how can I get more experience doing that? Talking to your professors and being open to volunteer opportunities and summer internships are some of the best options out there. I do personally believe that you deserve to get paid for your contributions in this field. So there are lots of opportunities for summer internships that you can participate in before you have a college degree. And this is kind of where you can start looking for those. Texas A&M Wildlife and Fisheries Job Board is my personal favorite. It's actually where I found the job that I'll be starting in January. Conservation Job Board is a really good one. I've also had some luck with Ecolog and with Conservation Legacy. That is who I'm currently working for with the Scientists in the Park series individual placements internship that I'm currently in here at Bandelier. I'm definitely willing to provide some insight about my experience with them if anybody's interested. And I also think one that people don't give enough credit to is social media. I've found so many incredible wildlife conservationists and natural resource scientists on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even places like TikTok are starting to have really, really good platforms for science communication and just sharing natural resource-based jobs as they appear. It's a really, really easy way to network with people, and I think it's only going to be getting more popular as time moves along. Just one final thought to close off the presentation is a personal favorite quote of mine. Diverse people bring about diverse solutions. Natural resources conservation is a huge undertaking. You saw how many different fields there are within this giant umbrella, and there's no single group of people out there who can solve all these issues together. We need as many hands on deck as we possibly can get. And if you are remotely interested in having any outdoor career, I really encourage you to do the best you can to pursue those interests. I am always open to assisting with writing resumes or cover letters or anything like that. I've included my personal email here if there is anybody who's interested. And with that, I think I'm done.
Awesome. Okay, so we do have a lot of questions. So it's basically, they're blocked off, which is awesome. So the first couple are going to be about salamanders and then so on and so forth.
Perfect.
So how many salamanders did you find?
So at Bandelier this year, we only found one. It was very exciting because it was the first that had been found since the late 80s here at the park. We're hoping that since it was a juvenile, he at least has some parents out there somewhere. We surveyed areas over and over and over again, and we're never able to find any others at Bandelier than that one singular one. Looking at the overall project area, Bandelier, the Caldera, Santa Fe National Forest, we found 42 in total, which was a record number since this project started, I think 6 years ago. So that was really exciting.
Okay. Do they travel very far? That's my own question. I'm sorry. Do they migrate?
They've been recorded traveling up to 12 or 13 meters in less than a week.
Oh,
That's
wow.
pretty uncommon. Most of the sweeping that we were doing was just within a 5-meter radius of where that salamander was originally found.
Okay.
They won't move that far unless they really have to, because it's just a huge energy expense for them.
Okay, and this question is, don't they need, I think it's a relative of yours, Mary, don't they need water to reproduce?
Ooh, they do not. The species is a completely terrestrial species. There are, like the tiger salamander that I was talking about, they have an aquatic stage where the eggs actually hatch in water. They swim around like little tadpoles, and then they kind of go through metamorphosis like a frog does. But the Jemez Mountain Salamander doesn't go through any of that. They lay their eggs on land, they hatch looking just like this picture here on the screen, and then they just get bigger throughout their lives.
Cool, very cool. And what is their general, so I'm sort of I get what this question is saying, so I'm going to ask it like this. What is the overall range of the Jemez Mountain Salamander?
Oh. It's, I don't know if I could answer that specifically, but they are pretty exclusive to the high elevation conifer forest in the Jemez. And it is kind of a shrinking habitat type with the wildfires that have come through. So I think it's kind of constantly changing, and I don't know what like the latest info on that is.
Okay, and do you know how many individuals there are in existence? Is it the 42 or?
We're really hoping it's more than the 42. It's hard to say. They're very elusive. Part of the research that Dr. Carricker is doing now is looking at detection probabilities. She and her team are trying to figure out how many times you have to survey one area before you can say, okay, we found all the salamanders that exist here. Mm. And it ranges a lot. They need a larger sample size before they can really complete the calculations, but sometimes you might have to do as many as 10 to 20 surveys of an area before you can even start to say, okay, there's probably not salamanders here.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. So we're moving on to the owl questions. Is it true? Is it true that owls make terrible pets, either because of what you have to feed them or their lack of ability to be trained?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I'd imagine that they make pretty bad pets just because they're big and probably pretty messy.
They're likely protected as well, right?
Yes, you cannot take a federally protected species and keep it as a pet.
Right. Just a law thing. I don't know if they're bad or whatever. I think you're just not allowed to unless they're rehabilitated. And unreleasable, I should say. Follow-up question. Is there a place near Los Alamos where I would be able to pet an owl?
I don't know of any places.
There is a place that you can see an owl, a couple of them. There's a raptor center outside of Santa Fe, and there is the wildlife center outside of Espanola. You can't pet the owls, but you can definitely see them.
Nice.
Okay, so let's see. You have spoken about endangered animal species. Can you comment on any endangered plant species in the Jemez? I just decided to ask this one because maybe you did know something.
My plant background is very, very limited. I wish I could talk about that more. I definitely, that's something that I would have liked to have some more experience in, but I was mostly a wildlife person.
Got it. Cool.
Sorry.
No, you're good. This is another owl one. How will owls behave if you approach their nest during the day?
I couldn't be certain on that. They can be territorial with one another, but I know in past years, both interns and some of the resource managers here at the park are able to get really, really good pictures of the owls up close. I think if you're approaching a nest, they're probably going to be territorial about it, but there's some pretty good pictures of fledglings kind of just hanging out either near a nest or like up in a tree, and they just kind of sit there. They don't really have much of a reaction.
Nice. Okay. So this is a mouse or mammal question. What does the mouse do the rest of the year? Does it just hibernate or?
Yeah, they kind of, I don't know if it's a true hibernation. It could be more of a like a torpor where they just slow down their metabolism. They're not necessarily asleep. There's a lot of technicalities between true hibernation and just kind of slowing down energetic needs when food availability is lower. But they do have like burrows, and they'll kind of hang out in those riparian areas.
Okay, awesome. So we have two owl sound questions, and they're basically just asking what the owl sounds like. And is there any way that you can play the 4-note sound?
I was trying to find a good one that I could put in here. The Merlin and Audubon websites both have really, really good resources for bird calls, I would recommend just searching Mexican spotted owl on either one of those sites, because I could not find a clear enough one from our recorders to include in the presentation.
Got it. Thank you. Those are great resources. Beaver question. Has the introduction of beavers impacted, or is it expected to impact any of these species that you've spoken about today?
Oh, that's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I guess in theory, it could affect riparian habitat for the mice. I'm not exactly sure what that would look like, but beavers are ecosystem engineers. They are very, very destructive, and they'll take out like a whole willow stand in just a few weeks. So I can definitely see that impacting the mice in particular, but I'm not sure if there's been a lot of research done on that. That would be really interesting to look at in future years.
It would be, I agree. So I'm just like looking through. Okay, so we have two. Just see if I got all the animal-based ones and research-based. So this is about your journey right now. What's the biggest challenge during what was the biggest challenge during your internship at Bandelier?
For me, it was probably just being in a very, very unfamiliar environment. All of my education and upbringing had been on the East Coast in deciduous forests and Southern Appalachia. So coming out here to these shrublands and the high elevation conifer forests was just mind-boggling, seeing how different the environment is, when in reality I'm really not that far away from home, still on the same continent. It made me have a really big appreciation for the diversity of the different environments across the United States.
Yeah, that's awesome. What is GIS?
Ooh, good question. It's a field of mapping, and it is incredibly important for so many of those other kind of like subfields that I was talking about, because it allows scientists to create maps that look at things like fire history across a region, or expanding ranges of invasive plants, or animal home ranges. It's a really, really good tool to help visualize different research aspects in the natural resources realm. I'm not an expert, so I can't say too much, but there's some really good GIS like classes and stuff that you can take out there.
Totally. It's a really big software, and it stands for Global Information Systems, I think.
That sounds right.
Okay, so last two questions. What is your living situation like when you do internships like this one? Do you usually have to live with roommates?
Good questions. Yeah. In both this job and the job I'll be starting in the spring, I have what's called field housing. So it is housing that is provided by my employer. Here at Bandelier, I actually get to live in the park, which is really cool. I have awesome roommates, and it's been honestly one of the perks of the job is getting to kind of form a bond with your coworkers who are all living in the same area, and I don't know, playing board games together and stuff after work. And it'll be the same situation when I go to South Carolina. I'll be living at a wildlife center with my coworkers, and I think that's really is part of the experience.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. It's a life of adventure. So there's one comment, and then I'll ask you a silly but nice question at the end that someone sent in. So this is just a general comment. I'm just wondering if you knew what any resources for this, but there are quite a lot of older adult volunteers in northern New Mexico who might be interested in helping at Bandelier Ovias Caldera. Are there any resources that they can turn to for finding volunteer opportunities?
I'm gonna put
Research that you're doing?
sorry, what was that last part?
Research and things that you're doing.
I'm gonna put Sarah on the spot real quick because I know Catherine did that. It happened with Catherine's presentation.
Sarah, if you're still on, you can raise your hands and I can I can co-host you if you want to say something.
I know there are volunteer opportunities here at Bandelier, and Sarah's a terrific contact for that. If you're looking for opportunities outside of Bandelier, I don't see any issue with using those job boards. Let me pull it up again. These resources, my social screen sharing, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think these are all terrific resources regardless of education, age. There are, even with, I'm pretty sure Conservation Legacy and AmeriCorps has a program for retired individuals. And I don't have any intel on that specifically, but I would go on the Conservation Legacy website and see if there's anything listed there.
That's great. Those are great resources. And Sarah Milligan is saying that you can also email her if you have any questions about helping out. Cool and awesome. So last question to tie it all up. If you could be any animal, what would you be?
Oh gosh.
Sent in by Kara Fox.
Oh, thank you, Kara. I don't know. Salamanders are pretty cool. They definitely don't have everything working in their favor, especially out here where they live underground, but they can't even burrow on their own. But I have such a soft spot for them. I think they're amazing creatures, and they have such large impacts on the ecosystem without actually being a very, very large animal. And I think it would be fun to just kind of crawl around all day eating bugs.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thank you. So that is the end of our questions. So I want to tell you, Marissa, thank you so much for sharing all that information. It was very good. I think that young adults will find it very useful. And yeah, thank you for everyone that tuned in this evening, for asking wonderful questions. And there are lots of upcoming peak programs. Please visit our website, peecnature.org, peaknature.org, to find out about those. So yeah, thanks everyone. Have a good evening. Marissa, again, great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And have a good night.